For years, Caribbean economies have prioritized foreign residents and tourists, competing for foreign workers and digital nomads. But for the first time, four nations are saying we're putting our own citizens first.
From tomorrow, nationals of Barbados, Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Belize will be able to move among these states on an indefinite basis.
Nationals of these four countries can now live, work, study freely across each other's shores. Barbados, Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines quietly opened their borders to their citizens. No work permit required. This idea of a unified Caribbean has been the holy grail of the Caribbean community, or CARICOM. But for more than 5 decades, it's been more about politics than practice. So why this shift now, after all this time, and who does this long-awaited freedom really serve? The idea of free movement was first written into the Treaty of Chaguaramas, the one that established CARICOM in 1973. It was signed by Barbados, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. In 2001, the treaty was revised, and the goal was actually to let Caribbean citizens move, work, and trade freely across the region, like the Europeans do with the European Union. But free movement rights were granted only to skilled workers, nurses, teachers, but others were left out. Of course, every leader loves to say that they want regional unity until election season comes around. Letting foreigners, even though they're from the CARICOM region, compete for jobs is considered political suicide. Even when treaties were signed, every island wrote its own policies. Barbados required a specific certificate, Trinidad wanted another. Immigration officers were not trained. The immigration system at the border was not synced. Travelers kept facing red tape and humiliation in some cases at airports. The wealthier countries, Barbados and Trinidad, feared a major influx from migrants from the poorer nations in CARICOM, whereas the smaller economies were afraid of losing their talent to these bigger, wealthier countries in the region. And underneath it all, there's also pride and rivalry. One Caribbean sounds great on paper, but each of these countries have distinct identities and cultures. On the other hand, the Eastern Caribbean runs a mini union, the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, small island nations that have full freedom of movement, and they've had it for over a decade. What's happening now is that idea is spilling into CARICOM. 4 CARICOM nations relying on a clause that allows enhanced cooperation among 3 or more nations who are willing. So what does this new agreement between Barbados, Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent really mean? Citizens of these 4 nations not only can move, live, and study across each other's shores, but they also have the right to access emergency and primary healthcare, as well as secondary education, just like the locals. Let's face it, for years, Americans, Canadians, and even European nationals have had an easier time of island hopping or living anywhere in the Caribbean than Caribbean citizens themselves. The new agreement with Barbados, Belize, Dominica, St. Vincent, and the Grenadines is essentially changing that colonial narrative. Why these 4 nations in particular? Each of them brings a different reason for signing up. Barbados is politically stable, service-driven, but its prime minister says it needs people to keep its economy going. It's about labor and mobility of that labor. 1 in 2 Bajans will be over the age of 65 in less than 25 years. But also, it means easier access to skilled workers, especially in hospitality, tourism, education, and construction. For tiny St. Vincent and the Grenadines, free movement really is a lifeline. Vincentians already crossed to Barbados for seasonal work, in hotels, in construction, and more can now do it openly. It opens a real regional job market for St. Vincent. Workers can earn, and they can also send money back home and still return. And that's really crucial because back home in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the contrast couldn't be sharper. In the Grenadine side of the islands, you have billionaires who have enclaves like Mustique and Canouan. For a country that is also very prone to climate disasters, as many others are in the region, mobility is certainly resilience. Belize's economy is tourism and service-driven, sectors where labor shortages are pretty sharp. Opening up to this regional pool would bring them more workers, not just at the lower level, but also mid and upper management, which means they could bring in workers from the region instead of from Europe or from the US. Certainly that would be a change for the tourism industry. Dominica is pushing for tourism growth. It's seen a remarkable increase in foreign investment, and it wants to attract talent for it. It also has long endured outward migration and brain drain. Just days following this free movement, Employment Agreement, Barbados and Dominica went further and signed another agreement to collaborate in promoting their tourism industries, even offering multi-destination packages and combining their efforts in marketing. Tourism is the Caribbean's shared lifeline economy, and yet every island still markets itself like a rival brand. So this pact will be able to show what collaboration could look like. Ultimately, the reality is Caribbean people have always been on the move. Barbados already hosts thousands of Vincentians and Guyanese people, for example. Dominica and St. Vincent as well have their share of migrants. But not everyone is seeing it that way. Social sentiment shows that Bajans in particular are worried. What about our healthcare, they say? What about outsiders taking our jobs? What about crime? Belize has also voiced similar concerns from people as far as crime. Prime Minister Mia Mottley of Barbados explained that all of the names will be vetted against Interpol databases as well as US Homeland Security databases. Free movement, she said, is not a threat. In fact, it's how Barbados will remain sustainable economically. But here's the reality too. High costs of living in these Caribbean nations will not make it easy to move. In fact, moving to Barbados even is not cheap. Of course, this isn't just about economics. When La Soufrière volcano erupted in St. Vincent in 2021, thousands of people needed to evacuate. When Hurricane Maria hit Dominica in 2017, images which most of us remember, the island was uninhabitable for months and people scattered to Antigua, to Guadeloupe, nearby, to family abroad. But coming back, rebuilding required navigating immigration systems, even within CARICOM. The climate crisis in the Caribbean is very real, driven largely by emissions from the global north. And it's growing more severe every year. Sea levels rising, hurricanes intensifying, volcano activity, droughts. And in a region of small islands with limited land and space and resources, well, when disaster strikes, people need somewhere to go. Not as refugees, but as citizens with rights in their region. If a hurricane destroys your home in Dominica, you can move to Barbados. Not temporarily, not as charity, but as a right. You can work, live, send money home, help rebuild, and return when you're ready. If the volcano erupts again in St. Vincent, also, people have 3 other countries where they can restart their life without starting over in a foreign land, navigating a foreign immigration system. And that is what this agreement really does. Governments are saying that they're prioritizing their people, they're creating the infrastructure for them to move, to survive long term, and to thrive. Not just for tourists and not just for digital nomads. So October 1st wasn't just about policy, it's about possibility. 4 nations, Barbados, Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines are saying we're stronger together than apart. The question now is whether the rest of the region will follow, whether Caribbean integration can finally mean what it was supposed to mean 50 years ago. In part 2 of this episode, renowned Caribbean economist Marla Ducaran will be joining me to decode what this free movement really means for the economies of the Caribbean long term. Subscribe to Tourism Lens right here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for watching.